So the assembly is conceived as a cooperative space for transnational cultural workers. And it's something that, you know, we've been thinking about for a while in terms of starting kind of like continuous conversations with cultural workers around different forms of instituting, like kind of difficulties and challenges that everyone is facing, and also kind of celebrating the shifting role of artists as well, and kind of like resilience that comes with artistic practice in terms of shifting between kind of artistic curatorial organizing, pedagogical methodologies, and also thinking of these as commons, and through these gatherings, kind of like centering, you know, friendship and kind of like collegial you know, values, where people would exchange their different methodologies, experiences that they've encountered within different institutions, both positive and negative, and how, depending on political contexts from which everyone is kind of operating, we can work together towards some kind of you know, more life, let's say life centric and not like capital oriented way of instituting. We are, as I said, you know, happy to have Aici Acolo with us, and they will now start the presentation that will take like 30 minutes about their context and projects. And after the presentation is over, we would like to just open it to a group conversation. And there are also like set of kind of questions that Flaviu and Edith shared in terms of what kind of feedback they would actually like to get, and to improve kind of educational and curatorial models they already have, and just like have kind of like a kind of cross-pollinating, in a sense, exchange about these experiences. So I think that's that. So please use the document, and you know, to just like write whatever, you know, like comes to your mind in terms of either references or feedback, like during this conversation or after, whenever it makes more sense for you. And this is being part of the archive. Assembly also archive that is accessible to public, and it can be also used as a reference in the future. I think that's it from me.
I'm gonna hand it over to Edith.
Yeah, so Edith and Flaviu, please take the screen. And yeah, sorry, before you do that, I would just ask everyone when asking questions, just like to introduce briefly, like yourself, just who you are, where you're coming from, and yeah. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to HEKLER for inviting us, and thank you for all being here. It's quite a lot of people. Yeah, so I'm Flaviu Rogojan, and
Edith Lázár.
Yeah, so we are from Romania, from Cluj, and I'm not exactly sure how many of you are familiar with like how things are around Eastern Europe. So I'm going to talk a bit, starting to describe a little bit how I see the context around here. So Cluj is this sort of second city of Romania nowadays. It's a youth city, which was always this kind of a student city, a kind of a hub for young people. But in the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years, it's been slowly changing into something of a more gentrified urban center, through a lot of development, especially in what the city loves to push as a kind of Silicon Valley of Romania type of narrative. So there's a lot of sort of the change has come in the way like the population is no longer leaving the city after the studies, but moving in and staying here. So it's a growing city in a way.
Also thought that the city to be like the most expensive to live in Romania because of the this IT narrative, which happens actually all over the Eastern Europe because it's where most of the IT is outsourced. So there's always a promise of another, Eastern European Silicon Valley. If it's not there, then it's going to be probably in the north of Africa or something. So it's always this change in life conditions and transformation that also leave a lot of the people that find themselves in a precarious life condition, like outside of really, I don't know, reaching a state where it's kind of like sustainable to live in a city like this one.
Yeah. And sort of going to, we are coming from this art background. I went to art university and it was art history. So our schools are kind of on this old traditional type of
like very old traditional, for example.
Very patriarchal.
Arts university because they didn't have an art history class, but at a history university. So I'm basically a historian, art historian, and like arts in general, classical arts ended around like, yeah, we didn't get to do like any kind of contemporary art basically in the study. So it was very traditional in this sense and preparing for a sort of like sordid academic life that didn't have to do anything with like curating or like practice of what you know other than very discursive and very academic and sterile way of art history basically.
Mm-hmm. And on the art education side, it's more in this I would say it's almost medieval in a way, that there's this notion that the teacher is the master, who is the master, especially of the technical side, right? And then the students are sort of apprentices. And another thing was really sort of important in the history of like how art education changed in the last 15 years was the fact that our education system is free for some people, so we don't have like this student loan debt situation like in the US. So in a one way it's more accessible, but then at the same time it's still a little bit expensive, and you get a scholarship based on sort of grades in a way. Now the way this was introduced and the way the teachers from art education understood this is that the students are now competitors for these scholarships, and it was a huge push for a kind of competitive nature in a classroom. So every student was really encouraged also by the teachers to not share and not talk to the other students. Now coupling this with the fact that the system here is set up so that the teacher is the one who is only right, and there's no actual discussion, but it's a kind of a one-sided sort of power position where the teacher knows it all and then evaluates. It really kind of hinders any type of critical discussion and any kind of critical thought. So when I was in university, I became part of this students' union where we were a bit fed up with things in the university, and we tried to change a few things. And through that, I actually got to found a students' gallery where we did sort of student shows, like work in progress type of situations. I really tried to take this notion of group crits, where you have sort of your colleagues bring feedback to your work in progress, which we don't have here in any form in school. So I wanted to bring this, but instead of showing your work in progress on like on a projector, there's a message here, sorry. I'm just gonna answer. Teachers encouraged to not share. Right, so like students shouldn't be friendly to each other because they are competitors for the same spot on the scholarship.
Yeah, and it's also like very master in the sense of they really learn the technical skills, like for example, painting or drawing and so forth, but they really lack the critical capacity of what they are doing. So also related to what Flaviu said, I also was part of a group that started an art history circle, so we can put together the art history group and the students that were in their last year at the Arts University, and try to find a place of debate because there was none. And yeah, so this kind of debate culture, it's basically non-existent, or at least not in this kind of formats of education. Also because everybody is competing for the same scholarships, and also the teachers encourage that, and they have their own favorites and so forth. So it makes everything a little bit less based on community and sustaining each other and solidarity, and more into this kind of neoliberal shit where we all have to, you know, push forward and fight and, you know, just climb up on each other. So it's kind of for that situation.
Yeah, I'll just show a few images. I hope you can see it. Right, so yeah, this is the school, the art school, and this gallery that was called Atash, which I then turned into Atash project space to doing this group crit situations framed as an exhibition, where the task was for the students to show what they were working on and what they were researching in the form of an exhibition, even if the work was not, let's say, completely finished. And then have on a different day, have a kind of a group feedback session with the colleagues. I really pushed for sort of trying to show the students' own works. We still have this assignment-based education system where all the students from one class get the same assignment and have to produce near identical results, so that it is easier and supposedly more objective when it comes to evaluation, because of this high stakes of determining who is going to pay for school and who isn't. So they're trying to keep it as objective as possible, supposedly. Yeah, but that's also very dry.
Yeah, it's like not in the same process of like memorizing something and just reproducing it and memorize it better, then that's the one that gets you know, the finance for the next year of school or something like that.
Yeah, in this space I organized.
To interrupt, so Edith's sound is muffled. If you could just be kind of equally, you know, close to the mic. Thanks.
Yeah. So we organized 8 shows, and then with these feedback sessions. Now the shows were okay, but the feedback sessions were a disaster. It's not a part of sort of there's not a habit in discussing things in this open kind of way. I at the time was also very bad with mediating and facilitating, and even sort of the architecture of the artist talk was, I think, problematic in a way. I sort of put the artist up front, and then there were a lot of rows of chairs of sort of the public listening. And for a lot of these students and young artists, it's the first time they have to speak in public, and it's a really unfriendly sort of environment where it was just a huge pressure. So one artist actually didn't show up. He fled the city to get out of this situation, out of fear of awkwardness. And then a few others ended up in really bad feedback, because I mean, here there's very little in the sense of a culture of this type of feedback discussions, where a lot of people see it as a kind of a personal offending criticism of
it's very difficult to like find constructive criticism because of that, because everything feels very personal in that aggressiveness. So it's always
also might be a small city problem in a way.
yes. Not so bad.
So anyways, the space, the university owned it, but they lost it due to like this complicated history of spaces being owned publicly in communism and then being privatized afterwards. Now it's this fancy burger place, which is typical of a lot of, or almost all of the spaces where we had any activities in. So a few years after this, I was finishing my studies, and I think you were also.
Yeah, my master's, and at that point, Cluj became like a very bubbly art scene because we had an alternative art center, even though we don't have an art center in the first place. And there were a lot of commercial galleries, but also art projects and performance projects that started, and it was very nice, and it seemed like a good place to start seeing a lot of things. And yeah, but we noticed that young artists usually don't have a place and also don't have a voice. So it just, I don't know, I think we just wanted to make a space for that. Also,
Yeah.
because we also had a lot of friends that were artists that we were thinking that in relation to things we were following or seeing on the other art scene seemed relevant, but yeah, they couldn't have find a place to be shown, especially when you're still a student or like just finishing your studies. So for us was like also, well, we want to do a lot of interesting things and also show the works of our friends. So that's how we actually began at the first exhibitions.
Yeah, so the context at the time was this paintbrush factory, which maybe you have heard about it. This became really big, sort of internationally, especially because of a sort of group of painters, mostly, at least on the visual art side. This was the main drive of the international attention, and they were doing really good things, as Edith said, and really cool. But they were a kind of a generation older than us, and in this really typical sort of post-studies angst, where you don't know what's going on with your life. A lot of our generation's artists had to face the fact that there's no real opportunities for people our age that much, and you really it's really a lot harder to stay in culture and in the arts, and to work on this.
A niche that was like dominated by the school of painting.
Yeah.
So that was more like looked after, like cherry picking from the students, like who's the best new painter, and every other media was kind of like brushed aside. Yeah, I mean, I also had like a soft spot and an interest in the digital arts already, so that was also something that didn't fit anywhere. And also we didn't have like projects that are more critical and discursive, so we really kind of looked through that, and also experimental ways of doing, which I think it's super great to have, especially when you're at the beginning, because yeah, then you don't have to fit your own image, so it's just nice to try a lot of things and have feedback and whom to share them. So
can I ask a quick question? So in terms of paintbrush factory, is one of the artists Adrian Geni, who was part of that generation?
Yes, definitely.
So my question is, like in relation to the kind of like modernist education that is predominant in a lot of like Southeastern European countries, and especially which like the positive aspect of it is like there is no accessibility to the market, so arguably there is more kind of like imaginative freedom and space for kind of critical interventions, but that are being censored by the professors who are actually practically, you know, regime following, or even if they're not following, they're very much like pacifying the potential of critical discourse. But it's really important, I think, to emphasize how much the Western market actually influenced that, and having these kind of occurrences as paintbrush, where all of a sudden a marginalized place becomes under the spotlight of what we understand as a global art market, and especially with Adrian Gheney being represented by like blue chip galleries in New York, and, you know, representing Romania at Venice Biennial. So there's this kind of like extraction of like marginalized place that becomes all of a sudden part of the market circuit. So, and what you are saying also affects the both educational format and the dynamic, like communal dynamics between art practitioners to mirror this like value system and not question participation in market at all.
I don't know. So I think it's better to like emphasize the fact that like the school of painting from which Adrian Gheney is also part of, they were actually outcasts, and they kind of made their names not through the school, but then the school capitalized on that image, and it kind of made a very big deal of what the art market means, and how if you want to be a successful artist, that's what you have to do. You have to work within the art market, but what is that, on how you get there? That's not a discussion that's really tackled. I mean, it's not something that I would be like I would support, but at the same time, if you're having that kind of discourse and also that giving them the means, it's also a bit psychotic and crazy. So it's, I don't know how to like talk about this exactly, because it's,
I don't know. I think that, I mean, it's also that there's not so many resources. So then people are less critical about sort of money coming from like the Western art market, because it's so far away that it becomes like an abstract source of financing. So you don't really, at least like on a large, there's not a lot of discussions in this sense, unfortunately, here. And there's no, let's say, also, I think it's also because of this lack of resources that we have like very uncontested institutions, which are really good and cool institutions, which are backed by these sort of almost colonizing banks in a way,
yeah.
Right? So you have like this entire transit network of spaces in Eastern Europe, which all of them make amazing things, but then at the same time, there's little discussion about how it comes from a very sort of banking sort of funding in a way, and I think there's a lot of uncritical attitudes towards funding in Romania in general. We don't really have the exercise for that, I think.
Also because we are kind of improvising along the way, so it's always like trying to make do with what you have, and if you can find a space to also have like a critical debate on social issues and so forth, like for example transit does, but you know, make use of a certain finance, but also raise awareness. That is something you can do, because it's always better to be represented and have a voice than to have none. So yeah, I mean, it's also these things that I think make this debate less about, okay, where is the money coming from, and how we talk about this, or why we don't talk about specific problematics of that, because yeah, this is the situation, and it's very precarious, so we have to make do with what we have.
Okay, so going back to where what we were doing in this is around 2014, 2015.
Yeah, I think it's better to also like put the context a little bit that we were very lucky to start this project because Cluj was a youth capital of culture. So we had access in a very kind of easy way to financing. We applied with a good idea and just had like an online vote of people. So we basically, it was also our community and so forth that helped us somehow get this financing. And there were a lot of new initiatives and young people doing stuff because of that. Otherwise, there's a lot of bureaucracy that at that point, I think it would have been very scary and very difficult for us to handle.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it was at the beginning of everything becoming more expensive. And we didn't and still don't really have the money to rent a space permanently. At the same time, a lot of the city was full of abandoned or unused spaces. They were just being taken up by real estate agencies and owners just jacking up the prices because it was a moment of a sort of an economic boom. And the downside of that was that a lot of these really cool spaces, especially in the center of the city where everybody kind of hangs out, just stood empty and locked away for years, really. In the meantime, we kind of found out there's a lot of other legal issues which keep them from being opened. But initially, we saw this sort of landscape of the city as being really pushed towards shopping malls and sort of festivals, at the same time with a lot of cool, nice spaces just being left empty, while sort of our generation of artists were constantly sort of complaining about the fact that there's no space for them to show anything. And so we tried to solve these problems in a way. And we started this pop-up gallery project, which was, I mean, this is our sort of MO. We find these spaces, which are, this is a former shop where we talk to the owners. There's quite a lot of convincing to do. And then we sort of work a bit to...
Yeah, at first I think we had a little bit of that, like making a white cube, but then we kind of moved away and tried to work more with atmosphere and things we felt like they were missing, also in terms of curatorial approach, also display, and also this atmospheric feeling that you have to a space that you can actually walk and leaves a sort of imprint. Yeah, so that's basically how we kind of went gradually from like a very, very low budget, and we also like worked low budget even afterwards because that's how things are. But we tried to experiment a lot and find ways to also engage the public a lot. And yeah, we make this copy art show, which is called PPM, Pages Per Minute, almost every year, where we invite a lot of artists to share works that are easily reproducible and scanned and Xerox and photocopied. And then we have a display that engages the audience to select the images they want, and then we photocopy the originals, and they can take the copy at home with them.
Yeah, it's a kind of a play on this situation where there's a lot of these Xerox shops all around the city. And then it's also kind of inspired by Seth Siegelab and this conceptual art history a bit, where we keep the original works hidden until you ask for a copy. And then there's a lot of types of playful things you can do with it, where the work is actually like a performance, or the work doesn't actually fit a copier, or whatever. I mean, it's a really fun format, and it's really engaging for a lot of people. And then in the end, it's also kind of an exchange between artists in a way, because we do these, and I don't have a picture right now, but we make these publications with a copy of each work, which the artists get in return for participating. Yeah, so initially the drive for Aici Acolo was this answer to the context where the paintbrush factory was the only actual contemporary art space in Cluj, and there was no real alternative, at least for us. So we wanted to create opportunities for young artists. And then as time went on, we're trying to find sort of a more curatorial voice. I just saw there's a chat here. Yeah. I don't know how much time we still have to get to the discussion as well.
I think good to, in terms of the kind of methodologies that you've used to engage public and kind of respond to, you know, create either like site-sensitive or site-specific projects. Maybe good to talk about the mapping project that you did and kind of the kind of workshops that you used to realize it.
Yeah, so we kind of moved also on this idea of finding like a sort of alternative educational programs or like practices that could also get out of the academical school. Also for me, that also has been an important aspect because I feel, as Flavio already said, that there is this sort of mental pattern that when you are in school, you have to listen and less get involved. And when you change the space, that has a very big influence on how students react, because the public in itself feels a little bit more like free or to ask, and more comfortable with starting a discussion, so they don't feel like, okay, I'm going to say something stupid and then I'm going to get a bad grade kind of mentality. So it's more like engaging, and also for us, these discussions are far more rewarding. And I think it also came with this idea that we have to find other ways of engaging, and also like these educational projects that could raise discussions and also critical content.
Yeah, so like just to talk a bit about this project. The project is called Maps and Mapping, Cartographical Tools. And we're trying to, it's a really broad topic, which we used as a sort of framing for a few different things. And the workshops, I don't have a lot of pictures, but the workshop here is with Regine Debati from We Make Money Not Art, and the artist Joanna Moll. I can write you afterwards the names. And they were talking about sort of mapping the environmental and social impact of the internet, with examples like where the materials from your cell phone come from, and tracing which servers are activated when you're sending just an email. It's really this kind of thing of raising awareness, and then talking to artists.
Internet as well, like things that usually we don't discuss, and we discuss in terms of identity or data sharing, but not the materiality of the internet in itself. So it's also kind of was a bit about like maps that we see and we don't see.
Yeah, the second workshop, we got access to all the historical maps from this Library of the Academy, which is a research institution in Romania. They have a collection of maps, which is mostly confiscated maps during communism. And it's really interesting to see a lot of them are these ethnographic maps, and you can really trace sort of very racist histories and these kinds of things as well. And then the last workshop in this series was with Lia Perzowski, and there's a kind of a different take on the idea of mapping, where she's doing mind maps and knowledge maps, where she's archiving and collecting a lot of information, creating her own sort of histories. which is interesting for her generation as well, because she is from this generation of artists who did not have access to information during communism, but then in the 90s were in this race to accumulate as much knowledge as possible and to share it. So she's creating these sort of installations, really, of information, and we kind of talked about that. And then together with this, we also made 3 pop-up exhibitions in Cluj, which are about sort of looking at the city and mapping the city a bit. This first exhibition is in a place, in one of these houses in this older neighborhood, where a lot of the houses are getting demolished to make room for big real estate investments, a lot of new housing. And the artist, Vlad Albu, she's doing this project, which looks in a kind of poetic way at how people move around by looking at migration patterns of birds. So there's some archival photographs and some maps that he drawn of birds and house as well. I mean, I don't know how much we can see through pictures, but I hope it's quite clear. So the first exhibition is about kind of the changes that are happening in Cluj right now with this gentrification and real estate development processes. The second exhibition is about seeing how Cluj was changing 8 years ago, like 10 years ago, through the eyes of an artist, Mika Kafkin. She's a transgender artist now living in Berlin, but she lived in Cluj. And it's really kind of about sort of her own perspective of how the city changed, especially in the sense of how people went out and how people used the nightlife in a way. And she links everything to the introduction of these legal highs. So the show is a selection of a few sketchbooks that she had, which are shown in a recreation of one of these legal high shops, which were everywhere in Cluj 10 years ago. And then the last exhibition in this series, we wanted to do it in a flight agency. They have a really cool window that we wanted to use, but the exhibition is called Tourism All Inclusive, and it's this Polish duo of artists who are also using this type of tourist trip to a place where actually no tourists go, in the Sinai Peninsula, a place which has a lot of tourist infrastructure, but because of terrorism, it's kind of unvisited. So they went to this place as tourists, but actually doing this research on. It's kind of about the architecture of the place, and they produced this video. And I think it's interesting in the context of Cluj as well, because how I see it, Romania, there's a few moments which really connected our city sort of culturally to the wider world. I mean, there's this whole narrative in Eastern Europe of recovering lost time in a way, after this sort of dark ages of communism. So one moment is, I would say, this broadband internet, huge internet access, which changed the city culturally and like the things people were doing. And I think nowadays the low-cost travel really connected Romania a lot, also culturally. And I think it's the moment when there's the start of awareness that we are living in this more connected world, and problems which happen in other places than sort of locally affect us as well. So we wanted to show that in this flight agency. And yeah, so we're doing this kind of thing where there's these sort of towel swans, which are kind of sort of funny take on a hotel stereotype. And then there's the video which they did in this show. And then we had like another show. This work is about how the city center is changing in a way, like a few different definitions of what the city center of Cluj is, taken like from a survey, and then you kind of see it growing in a way. Yeah, but I'll just stop there because I think we can just go on talking about works a lot.
Yeah, this one, the exhibition was actually done in Bucharest, and it was part of the workshop series, and also invited some other artists, but it was more as to create a context for the workshops and some of the ideas that came out of that. So it was also like this putting in, finding a context for the artists and for the works that are in development, and yeah, trying to find ways to show what the workshops gave as a critical result.
Do you want to open?
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot, and yeah, I mean, right now we're in this position where, for the last few years, we've been sort of applying for a lot of funding, but not getting that much back. So we're kind of trying to find. What we found is that a lot of these early shows where we were really focused on creating opportunities for showing work, in the end are good at that thing, but then it's not really sustainable from a lot of other points of view. So we're feeling a lot of the need to bring sort of production support as well, research support, and this can be also in the form of financial support, but also just in the sense that you have somebody to talk to and somebody to share your ideas with, which I feel is a thing which we are lacking given the sort of shortcomings of the academical side of things, and also the fact that there's no actual institutions in Cluj. Our city is really keen on festivals and focusing all financing on temporary situations, and there's no kind of long-term institution that exists in this area really. So we're kind of finding that there's a need for different types of support besides exhibitions, and we're kind of trying to branch out a bit and try other things.
The idea of actually offering time, and trying to kind of.
Sorry, the idea of what?
Of offering time, like actually having time, this idea of having time and to think about a project and just have not only so with whom to discuss, but also time to do research and corroborate the production of something with that, rather than just, I don't know, commissioning works or giving money for a work that is just that once and then that. And also like trying to find bridges with other people that work in the same way as us, and I don't know, also to place people in a kind of a network. So we're just, yeah, we're thinking about sustainable disease basically, and what about how we can change the exhibition format, for example, and what working or showing artists means.
Do you want to open it up for people?
Oh yeah, just before that, Edith, do you want to mention open call now or
yeah, I mean, we can put that at the ending. I mean, just like, because I think it's just nice to have this share of ideas about practices we are doing, and yeah, like how we deal with these situations.
Okay.
I have a question.
Hi, Anna.
Hi. I was really interested in, well, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. Very compelling and really important project. And I was curious about the way you are talking about the importance of pedagogy and this sort of like alternative learning experience. And as you look to find more sustainable models and kind of expand your work, I'm interested to know if you're thinking about also expanding your audience, like thinking about is there a public who can interact with your work and your projects who are not necessarily from your community, like the art community, but sort of more like the people, sort of everyday citizens of Cluj?
Yes, so in terms of educational kind of situations, until now, it's kind of been more focused, or we're trying to focus it on first bridging different scenes. Like, for example, we are very interested, or we have been in the last couple of years on the digital arts and or manifestations of that, and we want to try now to bridge it with the IT scene or like gaming, also to find ways to talk about the critical sides of this and have like a critical discourse and not placing everything on these festivals and you know, just like gaming festivals and so forth, but also discuss about the medium you're using, the practices, the politics of the body, for example, and all this situation about gender. And I think, yeah, so, and also the social impact. Yeah, I mean, what we also have in mind is to work, or like to bring here artists that are usually involved in working with communities, and then can bring models and tools to other artists to do similar, not similar work, but kind of find ways to implement that and extend that. And another practice that we have been using a lot in order to bring audience, like everyday people, is through the guided tour that Flaviu usually does.
Yeah, it's unfortunately there's not that much interest in the sense of I think a lot of people are still not really used to seeing contemporary art events in the city that much. So there's a lot of skepticism when it comes to that. I remember when I did the Students' Gallery, which was in this really amazing space with two sort of open windows, and the door was always open. And I think there's a lot of sort of mediation that needs to be done. I'm always very glad when people walk in, but it's a rather rare event in a way. And I think we're also a bit too small of a group and organization to really tackle like a lot of audience development program situations, right? But yeah, as Edith said, I think we are aiming to diversify our audience more in the sense of getting to this interdisciplinary type of collaborations between sort of art people, but also from other areas. And yeah.
Thank you.
Let me go to the notes. Trying to find the notes.
Also related to what Anna said, you mentioned during our conversation that also some of the spaces that you're activating actually belong to their private property. So you would negotiate kind of like section of the house that is on the street with local people to activate them as an art space and exhibition venue. So that's also an opportunity. I mean, it's also a way of like working with the communities outside of the kind of art field. But you also said that it's not necessarily like a fruitful, kind of exchange or conversation that happens there. It's more, business in a sense.
I think it's a bit difficult for that kind of mediation, because there isn't much this, I don't know, practice of culture in the city other than like very big festivals. Also because they advertise that, you know, this craze and trying to bring a lot of people together because it's money-wise, right? But I think it's also like something that we have had a lot of thoughts, but it's yeah, but we just didn't find yet the practice or like the people to connect to, so we can just put all different audiences together. Because this idea of the guided tours and also having spaces that have like a front window was exactly to like attract people on the street that usually maybe won't go to a museum, like an contemporary art museum, if it's not the museum nights or art gallery nights or something like that. But yeah, and there was a lot of like a couple of times that were very nice with even workers coming in and seeing what we're doing, but yeah, it's not like on a regular basis. So yeah, it's just like it's something that we have to work, and it's also because we have funding and we don't have funding, also our practice is not constant, so that's also a problem, because if you don't have like continuity all the time to have like a very specific program and go with it, then it always has ups and downs, also like on how your audience perceives you and the public you have for that. So it's also something that contributes to this.
So if anyone, feel free to ask questions. I just want to steer the conversation a little bit towards you know, like individual experiences that some people in the group have in terms of executing kind of their own projects and having like similar issues in terms of dealing with different audiences, questioning what audience is or what public is, and how the kind of like local economies and distribution of resources and just kind of like neoliberal politics are affecting the work of artists and curators, especially with artists being kind of being depicted as on the front seat of gentrification. So I want to like invite people to talk about it. Like Anna did a really amazing project with Essex Market in Manhattan, and also Mohammed is working on. Is Mohammed here? Yeah. Mohammed is also developing a project that is called Museum of the Displaced, in terms of also asking the question what museums even are and who are they serving for, and how we can imagine some other form of instituting. Then Faride is finishing her class at a really interesting place that is called Center for Urban Pedagogy, and has been doing a really great job with working with a group of students focusing on incarceration. And it seems that the methodologies within the syllabus are really, really amazing in the sense of how to be both kind of concerned with social issues and one's own personal experience, and how to bring it to the, you know, to action, like activating not just oneself, but also the community. And many other people here that, yeah, just, you know, it would be really great for everyone just to feel free to kind of think through, to or like re-traumatize when it comes to old projects, and and kind of brainstorm when it comes to like ongoing ones. Anna, you want to start?
Sure. I don't want to take up the conversation time, but yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking about like how, like you were saying, Nataša, like culture is used as this sort of economic gentrification tool, or this kind of, people always contextualize art making within its kind of like economic value or its like relationship to capital. And I always have found like major issues with that. And so I think a lot of times, like with the project that I did in Essex Market, which was very much a collaboration between the vendors of the market and artists, and also like people who were just shopping in the market. Pretty much like all of the artist projects were contextualized like outside of art, so we didn't even talk about them very much as art projects. And like I still think that the vendors, some of them who participated in the art projects, were like, oh yeah, like they don't even think of them as it having been art. And to me that is like really important actually, because I think in some ways it takes away the like aura and this kind of like magic that happens around art, where it's like this singular thing, that this like object-based situation that creates like so much value like around art, and it kind of purposefully is like devaluing it through these like social and very like intimate interactions. So and I actually also like organized a project in Cluj in 2014. It was in Cluj and also Timișoara, which is where I'm from. And it was around the 25th anniversary of the revolution, and it was these sort of like alternative forms of commemorating the revolution of 1989, which is like this very heavy topic and is always like talked about in a certain way. And it was a way of bringing alternatives in order to have a more complex discussion around the legacy of this event. But anyways, I found my experience in Cluj to be like kind of the same, where people, all the artworks were in public space, and a lot of people were really like skeptical of what was going on until there was an actual social interaction happening. So as soon as artists or like myself or my co-curator, we were able to speak with people and actually just like be friendly and talk about what was happening in front of them, like in their public space. It was always about like kind of taking away the idea of like art, like, oh, this is an artwork. And so, you know, people suddenly feel like if you say it's an artwork, they either are like, well, I don't understand art and I'm not qualified, or I'm not intelligent enough to comment on art. Or they're like, this sucks. Like, I hate it. It's ugly, you know? And so like getting away from the two extremes, I think kind of can only happen if you're like, well, it's not really art, you know, and kind of take away the discourse of something being art. So I don't know what other people's experiences were in their projects, but I'd love to hear what folks think about that.
Thank you, Anna. Farida, do you want to share? I'm going to just like straight on call you out.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for sharing your work. That was awesome to learn about your practice. I guess, yeah, I have a question, and also I can share my experience. So I've been working as a teaching artist with two organizations, BREAK, which is a nonprofit organization in downtown Brooklyn that has a department dedicated to youth education. And they mostly work with underserved, underprivileged public schools in Brooklyn through the funding that comes from the Department of Education and also private funders and some corporations. And then also I've been working with COP, Center for Urban Pedagogy, which they have a focus on youth education, and they have their own specific philosophy and methodology in education, kind of like breaking down complex social and political concepts and issues that people local are directly working with and are affected with. For example, gentrification or incarceration and its impact on physical and mental health. making a new prison in the neighborhood and how it can affect the community and the neighborhood, issues like that. So they are kind of like bringing up those issues. They are hiring teaching artists to break those issues into smaller subjects, create space for students to discuss and research and learn about the subject among themselves, and then kind of like opening up the space and collaborating with stakeholders in the city to have a meeting with the students and have interviews where they can directly question them, or bring up issues or the things that they found out about the subject. And then for the last part, there's the production section that as a group we produce something like a booklet or a brochure, or it's usually in that format, and then as a group we go and share it with the community, like for example going to the subway and just like giving it to the people. There's always like a huge like town hall, kind of like a meeting where people from the community come and celebrate and they learn about the project that the students did, and then distributing the project in the community and kind of like sharing what they learned and practiced with the community, which is very interesting way of kind of, I guess, sharing information and informing the community and public about what's happening around them, but also talking, continuing with what Anna was saying about what is art, and thinking about, what is good enough to have the tag of art, or who is good enough to make art. Something that I experience a lot with the students is that, art making is always part of the practice. Even if we have the most complex subject of discussion, at the end we have to make something, and we have to use our hands at any level that we are capable of. If it's a drawing or making a texture or even like braiding something, I ask them to make something. So there's like a final production as an individual or as a team. And I always think that it's interesting to kind of like, as a teaching artist, they ask us to introduce yourself as an artist for the first session, but then it doesn't make any sense to walk into the classroom and be like, I'm an artist and I'm here to share with you an artistic experience and I'm blah and blah blah blah. Because they just look at you with open mouth and they're like, what are you even talking? Like, it's not even my concern what is art, but then through that practice, also like thinking that there's something as a high art, even in high school, even in middle school, redefining that, that you can just make it, you can just use your hands, and that's art. And even like including that in the final project, and be like, you have your voice, your creation matters, kind of, I include that in something that you share with a larger audience. These are like, I found really interesting methods of redefining what is art and what is artist from maybe the root, having like the same approach to elementary school, where, it sounds very strange to me when a 9-year-old is like, I don't know what, I'm not an artist. Like, who defines that? Who tells you? It's just like, it sounds weird to me to hear that from a 9-year-old. So yeah, I guess like my question was for you was, is there enough room, or are there possibilities for artists and collectives like you guys to bring in these discourses, these conversations into your public education? Is your education system open enough to have like after school programs in this line, or that's a no-no?
They do it, but I think it's private. So
yeah, there's a few private schools which are quite expensive here, because it's like only 2 or 3, I think, in the whole city, and they are not tied to this national curriculum, so they can be more flexible with what they bring in. And other than that, there is one project by this Cluj Cultural Center where they are only trying it out. I think last year was the pilot year of having sort of teaching artists in high school. But inside like the school structure, it's kind of very difficult to work with it. It's just a very hyper bureaucratic system where nothing gets changed. It's the same, practically it's the same curriculum since forever. But then there's like a few other projects, and I'm thinking now of sort of people from the art world. We used to do this thing with the art university sort of students association, where we, like for 17-year-olds, we did a kind of an art summer university situation where they came to art school, and it was really a project of sort of getting to know art in general. It's not really about the university or about being an artist. It's really about sort of interacting with people from a lot of different backgrounds and sort of being more in that sense. But on the other hand, there's this group called Mini Tremu, and they are doing a really cool project where they're doing an art camp for high school students, like 15, 16, 17-year-olds, with artists, and they're doing really, really nice things. So I think you should check them out. But other than that, there's actually very little going on in this sense.
We also have like more social and activist initiatives.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, so yeah. But this was like a very nice collective coming from the performance art and trying to involve an entire neighborhood that it's a little bit more marginalized on this green area that was between apartment buildings, and creating like a space for coming together. They also had like a lot of alternative art workshops for kids and adolescents, and it was a very intensive project. And also they really made it so they involved the community in a very active way, and I was like, you know, normal people, everyday people, and that was fantastic. But yeah, they also got funding cuts, so they are not doing that anymore.
Mohammed, do you want to talk a little bit about, or just to share your thoughts and your process?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. That actually affirms all the concerns that we have, and I think it's kind of like the problems are the same all around the world. It can be Iran, it can be New York, it can be Romania. And thank you for Anna and Taida mentioning the issues, which I also read within the presentation. So there are certain things. First is people don't really connect with the artwork as it is, as it presents itself in the form that it has right now, including galleries and museums. One is it's intimidating for people because deliberately they decided to separate their path from the ordinary, and that speaks to the nature of like the capitalist nature of the institutions and who they actually serve. And then also, I think this disconnect between the understanding of to what extent we can communicate with our audience and to what extent we are flexible as institutions or as curatorial platforms. So what we have been doing, me and a group of my curator friends, Anna Salazar, Canan Butar, and Samantha Jung, and Museum for Displaced, is to start thinking and imagining ways in which we can put the art on display, emphasizing on regaining the power of displaying art, because there is power in that, and start documenting the experiences that has been neglected by the institutions, because it's important for us collectively to know what's happening. And one of the best ways of connecting and you know, extending the stories and the experiences that we have is through ways in which we document and display the works of art. And I think it's there are certain things that we have to come and sort of at peace with them, because the reality of our situation is that there's no money. You know, the work cannot be completely relying on fundings or resources that are outside of the community. So that's one thing that's very clear for the work that we do. A second thing, which is a very important thing, I think, personally for me, is that when I asked Debbie Farber, the curator of support in Palestine, and I asked her, like, what do you, because I love their projects, go check their projects in what they do is really amazing. They have been doing it for years now, decades. And she mentioned one thing, and one quality is humility. So if you really want to connect with people as a curator, as someone who will have the power to say, this is art, look at it, you gotta have that. And I think this is what we need to start thinking about. Okay, so there will be no money, then people should not be intimidated by our presence. So now in that sort of situation, then what is art? Then what do I pick as an art? So, you know, point to it and say, hey, people, look at this. This is actually good. And then how am I gonna display it? How am I gonna differentiate that experience from what's already existing? I think this is the challenge for us. And if we succeed in that, then it means that there's hope, which I think there are many people doing it, and it's hopefully we'll get somewhere. Like people figured out that they should not be obsessed with the scale of the project. I think people are figuring out that success, you know, the definition of success is absolutely different in this situation. And I mean, I think we should have our own measurements and, you know, ways of evaluating our working place. But the urgency of the matter really dictates its own criteria on us. And I think in all of the projects that we're looking at, I mean, from different points, the frustration is in like, how do we determine that we succeeded in something? And, you know, considering that everyone, the art market, media, our colleagues, there's a pressure for you to be in a certain way, or to present your work in a certain way. Otherwise, you're not successful. And when you think you're not successful, you're not in peace with what you do. Being an artist, being curator, and it's very frustrating, and it actually doesn't let you be what you are and work your way into like the things and projects that you have in mind. So it's like a brief idea. if I was like clear enough to say what I have been thinking or working on, or how I see these things connect to each other.
Yeah, that really brings us back to the question of what is the institution and how to actually decentralize the notion of it, where practically each of us in this space is like in the process of instituting. So if we, you know, also use that kind of mechanism when it comes to like liberating arts from this, you know, contemporaneity, whatever concept that actually like directly serves 1%, and it is constructed for that very purpose, then I think that a lot of the issues that we are talking about are actually going to merge. You know, it allows for creation of a structure that is flexible enough to just morph all these different methodologies and way of thinking together, which, like, in my opinion, that is art. Like the fact that it is so transformative and powerful, and in whatever kind of capacity it does kind of points out the human condition. It's just a matter of like how it's actually being mediated, or how it's being created for, and for whom and with whom. So I don't know, I mean, for me it's like very like going back to that kind of like the importance of education, and what Farida was also mentioning, you know, having like 12 years old identifying or not identifying as artists. I think that's the key to actually, you know, really start deprogramming of this like notion of what art is from the core and very beginning, because it's really not doing anyone's. I mean, it is doing service to the kind of like globalist and like corporate economy, but it's not doing service to people who are actually integral part of the of this kind of transformative process. But I want to also is Bibi there? Bibi, where are you? I would like to. You are Bibi? No, she's not. Carlos, do you want to say something from the perspective of a writer or art critic? How just unmute yourself first. Or actually,
anything about what?
I mean, what are your thoughts from the perspective of a writer or an art critic when it comes to the concept of audience and how it functions in the realm of kind of contemporary art, or against, in between?
I don't really know what to say, but I think where it's particularly difficult now, I guess I can mention one project I'm working on, which I was just working on this morning actually, which I've been involved with organizing a reading group, which took place last year, about this book. By Zdenka Badovinac, who directs the Museum of Modern Art in Ljubljana. And so we're now, me, Zdenka, and someone from the reading group, the three of us we just did this morning actually, we recorded a conversation which is going to be put online via Independent Curators International, which is an organization in New York that I work with a little bit. And we had a conversation this morning about the final essay in this book, which is also going to be put alongside our conversation, and which is this essay that Zdenka wrote that called My Post-Catastrophic Glossary, which is about thinking of new key terms after she wrote it in 2018, imagining like as if there were some catastrophe and all museums were gone, and like how would we build institutions from after a huge catastrophe. And Zdenka wanted to do a kind of project based on this, because now it feels like we're living in this moment a little bit where the future of physical institutions and physical spaces and the futures of physical relations between people has now very much been called into question given the situation we're living in. And so we're thinking about what kind of what is a new critical vocabulary we could come up with in the format of a glossary. So using kind of collecting a new terms and writing about specific words from our own personal experiences to kind of create a new vocabulary for imagining and instituting futures of collective practice. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, kind of in relation to everything that you guys have been talking about. I don't have other insights really, because I'm just like a bit stranded and I've stopped doing, I've kind of taken a break from writing, or I think I feel like I need to recalibrate a little bit with what the, I guess since you asked about audience, Nataša, it's I guess I do feel it's an audience question of like, what is the audience for art critical writing? And I'm very much thinking about now in a time where exhibitions are, where the experience of an exhibition, let's just say, is changing a lot with much going online. I'm thinking it's made me rethink the values of who I'm writing for and what I want to actually be writing. So trying to think about other formats, other outlets, maybe other modes of engaging with writing. I think oftentimes I just have an assignment from a magazine and then I just write the assignment. And now I'm trying to reprioritize like what kinds of critical and experimental essays I want to write and for whom. But I've been rambling on a lot, so I'll stop there. But I did want to mention that this kind of keywords thing, I mean, I'll link it to Nataša and HEKLER, and I hope this can be distributed because it will be an open call for people to contribute keywords based on their own experiences with instituting collective things. But that's from my experience.
Awesome, thank you.
I mean, it's really interesting to think about like what is the collective or like what is the public in so many ways, but also for, you know, in this time when the ways that we're most comfortable or most familiar with like gathering people and sharing experiences or like creating something for an audience is radically different, and there's no real like decided alternative yet. And so, you know, even thinking in terms of like alternative spaces and how they function as like an actual physical location that has like alternative things happening inside of it, you know, just now like that's almost impossible to aim for. So yeah, I mean, it's something really interesting that you bring up, I think, about, you know, how is sort of communication or is the message or the outcome going to be completely sort of redefined or shifted based on how it's actually disseminated?
Yeah, another aspect of that, I guess the question that I asked myself from the perspective of an artist is, what does it mean to use material and make things anymore at this time? I mean, I guess we should have thought about it even earlier, thinking about global warming and even like archiving or using archival material. When, you know, thinking about the future, there's a conversation that by 2050, we don't even know if we have our resources on the planet and planet is going to be as is. So I guess, you know, these are like, yeah. And also like thinking about, I don't know, the more I experience our lives, like what's happening now, all the struggles that we're going through as artists, cultural workers, curators, and sustaining our practice, I guess like one of the solutions is collective work and sharing ideas. And then in terms of like the material, the more I think about it, the more I go to the core of what does it mean to be an artist, you know, and what does it mean to practice art, which is, you know, ideas, being critical, or I don't know, whatever, however you're defining that. And that could be translated into other mediums, which is conversations or, I don't know, or even just like stitching something, you know, but that comes out of a conversation, because I guess Mohammed was also talking about scale of the audience and who is the audience, which again, we come back to the community, who is our immediate community where we can share. So I don't know, I guess like I'm also going back and forth between what I'm used to know as art and the art scene and the audience and how it can be redefined, and the way that I'm perceiving and thinking and practicing art or switching to these new mediums.
Just to continue on like your question. I think it's interesting in terms of the processes of instituting, and but as Danka's book on comradeship, where she practically kind of breaks down the process of kind of like collectivity and process of instituting in the context of lack, where there are no like institutions of art and culture, and then that need that comes from kind of points of margin and a need to self-historicize, where we are not where the like in our current situation, the need for kind of like reclaiming narratives, reclaiming space, and self-historicizing is also existent in the kind of like, especially like settler colonial contexts. But then the question is like, what is that process for us? And if we are all on the same kind of page, that we are in the survival mode, that it's no longer a question of, is it an archive? Like, what is the archive? What is the process of actual kind of like sustainability in general, and especially kind of like cultural sustainability? I think that's the kind of, question, the point also to start from, of like, what does it actually mean together? What does it mean, the whole kind of concept of, what community is, what constitutes it, how open it is, what defines it, and even furthermore for like, questions about the collective, like do we, is the collective community as well, and where those overlap. And my tendency is to think less of I think in the community concept and less in a collective, where the collective has its own kind of like borders and it's definable and like easily measurable, versus the community has kind of like more of a shifting sense of it's a gathering around similar values, but then there's like alternative economy within the community itself that kind of sustains it, which goes back also to what like Mohammed said in terms of and everyone, in terms of the funding and how there's this kind of like really strong tendency for the longest time to actually go through the process of realization once something is being openly supported, versus actually working towards just realizing like kind of like sensible and sensitive realizing of ideas that are coming from communal need. And I think that's where this kind of like position of an artist, and especially of the authorship, kind of deconstructs, where I don't think that we can afford to have artists anymore, and not in terms of like who cares about art, but I don't know, I'm just like more and more entertaining that idea about kind of like decommodified labor, and how artists, the concept of artist as a professional is not something that we can entertain anymore, and that it's actually the power of art lies in so many different ways of kind of like motion and thinking and doing, and how it is segregated right now is not helping anyone, and it actually does need liberating from capitalism, which maybe will kill the artist, but it's a process that we are kind of, if we are really thinking critically of of the future that we are building in this moment, it's definitely something to think about.
Something that I have, like, between what you said and what Farida said, so the idea of like, what is art? This is the question. It's always the question, and you start always with that. And how can we affirm on what its necessity is. The first argument comes to mind, that why we think that art is necessary, because I believe and I think that art is a necessity for everyone. Like, everyone has to have that. And the argument is, how can we talk? I think the most important argument is, how can we define the necessity of art for everyone? And then when you start thinking and you start putting this together, it's like, okay, let's think about that as something that we need to survive. And then how to portion it in a way, or how to define it in a way that it's accessible for everyone, that everyone can relate to it. How can we document this process? Because then it's a totally different experience compared to what we had as you know, the institutions of arts kind of taught us, and our brain is pretty much shaped in a way that, you know, art school, you know, all the literature and everything kind of led us to understand and believe that this is the way the art should function. Yet we now know that this is not functioning actually for the public, for the people. So I think the first question is like, can we actually bring the argument of necessity of art and talk about that? And I think that shapes our path, as if like, what do you want to? I remember when it was like we are living in New York, we have a choice. We don't have it anymore, but we had a choice of like, oh, spending our time in MoMA, or, you know, spending our time in HEKLER. That's the conscious choice, you know, whether you want to give value to the institutions that you have, and you know, they're established, and, you know, you look up to them, or you really deeply want to start something new and invest your time and your energy there. I think this is a time that there's no room for messing around. You know, it's just like, what is important, and then, you know, when you determine what is important, you gotta act on it. And that includes, you know, excluding a big part of the prestige or the image of the art world, or image of what art is in the current situation, which is a very difficult job, and it's full of disappointment. I think we've got to come in time with like disappointment, and it's very slow and steady. I remember Berger once like wrote somewhere, like, you know, in like villages, people hadn't had enough money to eat, but they always had some money for the person who was telling their stories. You know, that was an important thing. That was something that we need to, and I'm not saying that we can rely on that situation at this point of time, but there might be a way to go back to that, because we all have these moments of, you know, sitting next to an artist and experiencing something and really deeply appreciating and wanting that to be in our lives, that feeling or whatever. So yeah, that's just.
So thank you for Mohammed for sharing your thoughts. This was really awesome to hear, and for a great presentation, Flavian and Edith. I would just add what you said about necessity of art, and going back to what Farida was saying about object making. So I'm an artist, and I've been seriously trained to do that for 16 years, which is more than half of my life right now. And I haven't been making anything for a longer time, because I see so many problems around it that were preventing me to, you know, be creative in that way. And exploring visual art, I was also exploring martial arts. So coming from these different approaches to what art actually is. And that made me really aware of like how focus is a powerful thing, and how it brings us to the point where time kind of it doesn't matter anymore. It's more important what is the effect that what you made is causing to other people. And what Mohammed was saying about stories, and you know, when you want to share a story and how impactful that is, the moment of sharing can happen in anything. So, but what it makes connected is the engagement and focus. And I think that art matters because of that. What the aura that it collects, that it reminds us on, that that's something that keeps us separate of, you know, words that some people maybe cannot understand. And that's what creates this huge difference between art world and the world on the street. And just to simplify even more this, in these past few months, I've been like learning about building, and this morning I was chopping wood. So that was another skill that I learned yesterday. And it took me a really small amount of time because I could connect my experience from art making and martial arts, which is to, you know, have strong core, have straight back, have strong knees. And the most important thing is to be able to commit to the strike. So to see your target, to see your goal, and you are chopping wood in half in 3 times. So it's like really, really easy. But what makes me understand that was my willingness to understand different systems, which comes from the focus. So I think it's really important in these conversations to be open for, you know, different approaches, which is not to close the ones that we already built, just to see with more depth what those systems were offering for us, but we were just like too busy to see them. So that's my kind of, and it can come from everywhere. And I totally agree. It's really stupid. The 9-year-old boy is asking, oh, am I making art or not? But it's also stupid when I, after like 16 years of art making, without having any say, I'll say, oh, am I artist or not? But fuck you, I am. Like, and I don't have the problem to say that. So, you know, just it's really serious when we talk about this. Like, should we now destroy all the artists? No, because they are awesome people, because they can make these connections. And that's what makes us valuable in a society. It's just the way how we communicate and what is the language that we use. We want to, you know, include local communities and all of that, but want to use art language. That's not possible. I will include you if we talk about wood splitting, you know? So, but I need to know how to split the wood. So I also need to be able to open myself to understand what are these other people's, you know, conversations and thoughts, in order to create this kind of really interconnected dialogue. So that's what I wanted to just add, if it adds anything to the conversation. But I think it is like interesting to listen about, you know, how to really engage the communities, and how to be cautious about, you know, funding, from where it's coming from, for whom, who is the audience. So yes, I was represented by the gallery in Paris, and it looks fancy and everything, but those women are awesome. They were super supportive team that, you know, made one exhibition that was just images on the wall or whatever happened, but then that exhibition also caused tears to some of the people in the audience, which also created some other dialogue. So all those things matter. And they shouldn't be erased. They should be what they are, you know, and you should take like the trace of it that matters for the next frame to happen in order to have a sequence of events. So that's it. So how to make art, I don't know. See that you are making art in everything that you do every day, be commit, and something will happen. I don't know.
Just to clarify, I didn't mean to really kill the artists. Just
Wow. You cannot.
Just to make that clear.
So yeah, that's why I really love what you said, like people enjoy just to listen to the story. I think that story matters, and the point of archiving is, you know, to tell stories. I guess, I don't know.
Eva, can you Eva is sending us messages. Do you want to join the conversation? I never know if people without.
Hi. Sorry, I switched off my video, but I had surgery yesterday for my arm, and so now I'm in a very discomfortable situation where I move around and do this and that. So I didn't want to be fidgeting in the video, but it was very interesting and brought me so many like flashbacks and memories, but also trying to look at it from a completely different position. Like, for example, I remember Italo Calvino's how it's in English, I forgot. It's stories about cities and paths that cross, and the
Invisible
presence
cities.
of one. Yes, the presence of one, and the future of one is the past of someone else, and the present of someone completely different. Something like that. I'm quoting something from 40 years ago, so forgive me. But it feels that there are so many overlapping stories, and that there is something very appealing in the impermanence of the communities or collectives which can be created and can be always springboard for the next one and the next one. Like, it feels that it's not a moment to make an exact model, but it's a moment to imagine as many models as possible so we can experiment with them and work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erika, do you want, I want everyone to speak, just to be clear.
Yeah, Helena, I feel you, what you were talking about. That's kind of, I guess, I really resonate with that orientation, which feels like at once it's kind of talking about an interdisciplinary orientation, but it's not just like interdisciplinary within the arts. You know, it's not like I'm a video artist and a performance artist. It's really just this like big picture interdisciplinary approach to making anything, which certainly has a humility to it, and a willingness and a drive. And when I've been listening to this today, and I mean just lately, I've been thinking about the question of like what is art came up, and I've been thinking about like what is contemporary art, because that tends to be what you see in the museums and what is institutionalized and like what people want to see. And when I was thinking about an example of a time that I participated in an alternative education situation, this artist named Amanda Gutierrez, it was the finest example I could remember, and I can actually send the link. She made a Tumblr for the class. I'll send it when I'm done talking. I'll search the internet, but it was called Pilsen Derivas, and she's someone who was inspired by the Situationist movement and derivas and sound walks, and she's kind of coming from a background in film theory and video art, and she had a residency at Mana Contemporary, and her proposal for the residency, I think it was maybe like 6 months to a year. She was all focused on this one neighborhood in Chicago called Pilsen, which is currently like largely a Mexican immigrant community, and it was originally like built, it's very unique in Chicago. The architecture like really sticks out. It's definitely my favorite community in Chicago. All the houses are smaller, and it was built by like Bohemian Eastern European immigrants, And then over time, it's in proximity to a mill in Chicago, so there was a lot of like influx of immigration coming in for people to work at this mill. And then that mill shut down, and then these Mexican immigrants came in, and it changed. And anyway, it's been through a lot, and it's really like visible. All of that history is really visible. And so Mana Contemporary is located in Pilsen. And she was working with people who were living in Pilsen, artists, students. It was actually a really diverse group of people. It was maybe around 20 people. And every week, you know, she would have us like start at Mana Contemporary or maybe meet somewhere in Pilsen. And it was kind of moving between the actual neighborhood and the institutional space that she had. Which I thought was a really unique kind of quality to it. But also she was working with an app designer, like a software app designer. And that became a pretty big part of the project, where this app person came into the class and designed an app for the class itself to kind of make sense with like, it was really interesting because a lot of the people in the classroom, you know, are not familiar with making an app or this kind of software, but it was just kind of came down to these practical questions of like, what do you want to do? Or like, what do you want to record? Like, who's going to be looking at this? And, you know, what kind of like, you know, phones do you have and things like that. And it just sort of got deconstructed in this way. That was just really simple and interesting. And then all of the participants were like using this app that they'd sort of like collaborated on together, conceptualized together. Maybe I'm rambling, but that's kind of as something I just wanted to bring to the table.
It's also what you shared like during the reading group, like last Friday. I thought that's also like really relevant for this conversation in terms of you know, creating you as a you know, person, as a practitioner, like creating art within community, and then having that switch from going from like really community created work into the market, into like working with established artists as a performer, and how there is a switch in that kind of like paradigm of like, what does it mean to actually make something with people versus making art in the art world. And that those are kind of like two completely different like universes of existing as a thinker and as a creator.
I mean, it feels kind of like you're making, like on the one side, it's like you're making art in earnest. And on the other side, you're like trying to figure out like how to play this game or something. When I was living in Chicago and I came to like, I'd hear about this. I don't know if I said this already last week, and this is something I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm just going to say it. It's simple. But when I was in Chicago, I thought that I understood that Chicago had an art world, and this art world was this thing that, you know, was every city had an art world. But when I would hear about this art world, you don't know what the art world is. And I go to New York and I'm like, oh, like now I see it in this very, very different way. And I'm still just kind of trying to wrap my head around it. And again, that's why I'm thinking more and more, I guess, like in the face of, you know, being unemployed right now, just about my career and like what is contemporary art, and like when is film contemporary art, when is performance contemporary art, you know.
Thank you. I don't know if Sanya is here. Sanya.
Hey, yeah, no, I heard I just turned off both video. I look like shit. But yeah, I've been listening, I've been coming, going, and I really enjoy it. I feel like it was really at one moment overwhelming for me because I feel like we discussed so many different topics and each of them are relevant regardless to the position of artist, creator. And thank you really guys for the talk and conversation. But I don't know, some things that stay with me regarding to my current mood is definitely this question about this psycho-emotional aspect of the pressure that the being in the circles really kind of comes included, like in talking about success, that it's something that I'm struggling in relation to, you know, what does it mean to be an artist or not? What does it mean to be a successful artist? Or, you know, like, does it comes with a list of exhibitions you've been to, or, you know, now with this global circumstances, I mean, like, including multiple communities or, you know, geographies. And for me, it's really comes to this question of stories. I really found it deeply touching, this idea of perceiving art as a way of communication. Of course it is. And then in relation to that, thinking about way to engage and share stories. So that's what stayed in me that I can kind of personally relate to. But since I kind of had this huge transition, since I was living in Switzerland for 2 years, coming from Belgrade, from Serbia, and then coming back to my hometown, I kind of lost this idea of just engaging, thinking what is your community or your public. So right now I'm struggling with that since I came back, because I came out of, you know, like, condition of burnout. I didn't want to come back, but then I realized, yeah, I really need time and space to heal, but then I also need to do my artistic practice. But how to force yourself to engage with a community you feel attached from in the meantime. So yeah, at that moment, I mean, at this moment, I'm still struggling to understand which will be my public. And from this, I find pretty obscure moment, of course, in the world, especially in Serbia. I mean, since I came back and I kind of had the time and space to see it differently, you know, being abroad for 2 years and coming back and then realizing I don't feel motivated to engage anymore. So how to find your position and all that. So, yeah, my concerns. That's it. I mean, it doesn't add to the discussion, but it kind of share my perspective of this maybe ambiguity of being in between and being stuck, or just, yeah, finding motivation to move on. And you cannot force yourself to find motivation to interact if you don't want to, but if the situation is like that, how you can switch it or shift the focus, or, yeah, where to go next. Yeah, all my concerns.
Yeah, so like I only been away for months, and I have the same issue. So it was very difficult because last year I was in Germany at Academia Schloss Solitude, very less precarious life, so to say. And I got back, so I had the same problems, like how do I connect back to community and what kind of projects I can engage with. And then I had somehow of idea. We didn't get finance, so the funding we needed. So now I'm a bit like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? So I think it's also what helps a lot is this idea of storytelling, which, because we keep telling ourselves about this, also storytelling in the sense of what we do, but the things we refer to. So for me, I think this is also important because you speak about art and engaging with the people. I think a very good cue is design, because there is a lot of movement in design that is worked with the people and not designing for the people, which also has been an important practice of how you can engage more on a social level and finding the language, the everyday language, but also letting go of the authorship, because when you know it's this idea of working as a collective, and that you have to have a product at the end, right? Because it's designed, so you have to, or at least some idea of how things might work. But the focus, it's more on how you work with the people in order to not to find solutions, but to find specific results to specific issues that are very different from one to another. So I think that's also important to look at this more like practical disciplines, so to speak, maybe, that can help us a little bit, because there's been a lot of engagement also in this, basically making stuff. So yeah, and how you can reuse, and that's also something that has been very important for me, or what I'm trying to do with Out of Stock, which is like this platform It's too bad that Carlos left because it is about experimenting with writing, and for me it was also a way to getting out of a writer's block because I'm an art writer myself, so that was part of the process. But also how we deal with shortages and scarcity, and how we can find other ways to imagine these processes. Also working with fashion and design because they are like such a good pretext for tackling like social issues because we live with our things all the time. So yeah, I think it's important to look at these practices that make the space of our everyday atmosphere, and also try to take from that how we can work with art in a more engaged way, I guess, also as a finding ways of language.
Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you for all the things you shared. It was very interesting to hear. I actually have a question because I'm a costume designer and I also used to be a fashion designer myself. I've been always thinking about sustainability in fashion and costume, and what does that mean when you work as a designer in theater, when you work on a production and you have a assigned budget to do something, and the same way when designing products and having to have a finished result, as you said. And so my question is about it. How did you become interested into scarcity, and how is that tied? Because I've also been working as an artist and designer, and I've been questioning where are the borders between the two. Like, when am I a costume designer, when I'm an artist? And I feel that's all tied together also with sustainability. I don't know, this sounds really weird, but so my question goes back to that, like, how did you become interested into scarcity in fashion and clothing design, and how's that tied to your other practice?
Yeah, so like it's a very personal kind of approach because I grew up in a post-industrial small town, and in Romania also we have like a lot like the second-hand culture, and it's a lot of it kind of started for that, like how you fictionalize yourself through clothing. And I mean, it was mostly based on these ideas with which I grew up with, because me and my mom were always going to these small second-hand shops and pick up very good clothes. Some of my labels even say like made in Western Germany, like, you know, that kind of the stuff. And also like you always reference it in terms of texture, on how well it is made and so forth, but you also style it. You make like you style it, so it's always it's a very like politics of aesthetics in a way, on how you work with these fictions that clothes can create. And yeah, like this notion of shortage and scarcity, it's also like refers to the region, because there is this stereotype basically on how Eastern Europe are always perceived in as somehow less, are always lacking something. So in a way, also my idea for a long time, I mean, something that I was interested in was like what soft decolonizing means, as in processes of also investigating stereotypes about different regions, and also finding bridges, also in terms of like economics, like how economic aspects create uniform like a leveler between people. For example, there was a huge debate a couple of years ago about the wages of seamstresses that were the same in Romania as if they were in Thailand. So that really created a bit of a, like awareness, because you know we think we are like second-hand citizens, but they are third-hand. So it's a little bit of another hierarchy, and then you have these economic placements. So all this idea of shortages was also like what you can work with and how you can reimagine and the resources you have. Also in terms of getting out of these parameters of thinking and perceiving. And to tell you the truth, I don't think there's a, at this point, there is so much fashion production and design production then that I don't really think that's such a big difference between this kind of design and just using it. Yeah, I'm not. I haven't my interest is like it's very personal one. Started with the static of politics of aesthetics and how we fictionalize ourselves and what fiction's passion create, and then I just got more interested in these biographies and storytelling through our objects and the stuff we have. And also I think that the two of them, there is like such a blurred line between, and I don't think that needs to be a definition about like what you're saying about working with costumes, especially in theater or like scenography. I mean, it's basically creating, right, a sort of an environment. So from that point of view, if we look at clothing also as creating an environment for the body, then I think I lost a bit of track of what I wanted to say, because I really have like a lot of ideas going now in my head also about this play between shortage and scarcity, because it's also like something that is very rare to find, which can also track back to like I don't know, limited editions of designers, but also like in terms of secondhand, for example, is that you sometimes find a specific piece of clothing or a specific object and nothing else, and how we can use it. I also been interested a lot in this idea of how we can fix it and what ugly aesthetics can teach us about functionality. So yeah, I think it's more like a mix of that, and also like getting out of the stereotypes of a specific region. I'm sure I didn't answer the question, because I just like after this discussion talking about fashion, it was like this a little bit with all this talking about like very specific educational practices and so forth. So sorry.
Well, it was a little bit of an abrupt question, like it was like all of a sudden. But
no,
it was
but I think
it's out of stock open call, because I'm interested in hearing more about it, and that's why I was curious what's your connection with it.
Yeah, so I actually been like a dropout academic in philosophy, and I was trying to put fashion in and talking about body fictions through fashion. So that was one part, but I always treated it like in a very intellectual way and very kind of disconnected to my everyday practice, which is based on secondhand culture. And yes, I think it started a little bit from that, and then I was just trying to find ways and the language to kind of get of that academical background. Storytelling was very handy, and then I realized that I actually am more interested in bringing and tracing different ways of looking at things and perceiving and experiencing than just putting together like a sort of theory or something of that sort. So out of stock, it's also related to this idea of always reimagining and thinking about fashion and design as kind of agents that can change our perception, also because they are also super normative and restrictive, but they also have like always this ambivalence because they're so dependent on also how we use them, and that's also like everybody's touch to it, so to speak. Yes, I'm a little bit like overwhelmed right now, actually. So it's
mute. No, that was great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean it's also late. I don't know how much. What's the time there?
I don't
like
11:15.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's late. Well, does anyone have any questions or comments before we wrap up? No. George, do you have questions? No. Well, thank you all for for this great conversation, and like the Flaviu and Edith, thank you for the presentation and just like sharing your practice and concerns. And it was really great hearing everyone, just like with your experiences and just like worries. And it's a really great session of just like kind of like troubleshooting and therapy and destroying the art world. Well,
thank you for all your thoughts. It was really helpful for us, I think. If you want to keep in touch, I can leave my our email as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we will send, if everyone agrees, a follow-up email CCing everyone, so you can all get in touch and continue your conversations on your own and potentially like collaborate. I think there were a lot of really great methodologies that were shared, and they're kind of like applicable, but in different contexts. And I just want to quickly comment in terms of kind of like resources. I think it's really important, and it's proven to actually be functional, to actually, going back to the comment about humility, of thinking that, what one has is actually what one needs, and that we are all in a position to share, and that we are all resourceful regardless of the positions that we are in. And it kind of like reaffirming that revolution will not be funded. So we are there to give what we have, and the change is already happening within it. So we cannot wait. There is no waiting for anything. And you guys been doing a really great job with the projects that you shared, which is just like a glimpse of. It's like images, like you understand the logistics of it, and just like navigating the kind of like politics and interpersonal politics, and it's complicated. Like we're all in really, in terms of being artists, arts workers, cultural workers, you're always in these kind of intersections of power, and how it's being how the resources being distributed, and like our own affiliation and complacency within these different kind of systems that we operate in. But I think it's just important to be honest about it, and to work together. Okay, so I'm not gonna bore you to death. Yeah, so let's, there is a reading group happening on Friday, and Rashmi Vishwankan and Dina Aladib, they will lead a session. So I'll send you info about it if you want to join, and connect everyone through email. If you have any notes, thoughts, anything, please add to that document that Flaviu and Edith will use. Or like any references, anything that you kind of mentioned. We also have like I made a list of things, so we will add that. Yeah, is that all? I'm kind of shutting down.
Thank you very much. That was really nice. The one thing that curators have the joy of, like being a curator, is to get to meet artists, and that we don't have that anymore. So it's good to meet artists now. Why Zoom?
Missing artists.
A complex relationship, but it's nice.
That's true. It's important to continue. And I don't know, I mean, in terms of these like different measures, I really look forward to like seeing dear people in person on safe distance. And yeah, you guys are free, right? In Romania, there is no in Serbia too, right?
So not really free.
Free, what is the meaning?
If you find a free person, I would love to meet them, you know. They're really free.
Have a discussion on the subject of freedom.
Yeah, that's for another conversation. Okay, well, have a good day, everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy.